That's what I'm saying. The text is like an object. It's gonna change perspective based on where you're standing. I don't know.
Hello?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I missed you, baby sweet. It was a day.
It was a day.
Please tell me you're seeing this too.
From Seattle, we're Drinking the Movies. This is Taylor Baker, back from Drinking the Movies, with one of our staff writers, Patrick Hao, joining me today to talk about a few different films. Patrick, you've been with us since, I want to say, July.
Yeah, I think July.
Thank you for joining me today. I know that it's not the most convenient thing to fly back from San Francisco, work a full week, and hop on the recording machines, but you're willing to do it for a discussion on Don't Look Up, The Hand of God, and West Side Story today. What do you think about these titles before we get started?
Well, first I want to say I'm really excited to be here. I have big mics to fill for big Michael Clausen. Yeah, always enjoy hearing you guys talk, so I'm really excited to be part of this. But for the three titles today, I think we have a good, diverse group of movies here. We have Don't Look Up, which that's how I'll start things off with. And West Side Story, which really surprised me, and Hand of God, which I'm less than mixed on.
Yes, I think that we're pretty similar in much of our reactions. It sounds like you responded more strongly than I did on 2, and I responded more negatively than you, just barely, on Don't Look Up, which is inviting all of the comparisons of not looking up when you're in the theater at the screen. But alas, as always, we'll do first impressions. Today we're going to talk about a few titles coming out in January. The first of which is a Guy Ritchie film called Operation Fortune. I'll leave that colon after name to you, though, Patrick. What is that? How do you pronounce that?
Oh, geez. Ruse de guerre?
And that's what it sounds like to throw someone under the bus.
Thank you very much. Is this French? Is this Spanish? I don't know.
I hope we'll find out, but I'm going to guess that with Guy's sensibilities, that it's probably more of a European leaning, so I would think French or Spanish, like in Spain.
Yeah.
But without further ado, let's find out.
Contractor, you possess a unique set of skills. What's that? Power up. You said it was clear.
I said the front was clear.
Front, back, right, wrong. Anyway, shall we? So what we got? Something rather nasty has been stolen. We have to stop that getting onto the open market. Who's the buyer? Greg Simmons, the billionaire arms dealer.
Oh, a lot of very serious faces up here, aren't there?
You can't catch this fish with conventional lures. I'm sorry? The lure being? Tony Francesco. The movie star. Greg Simmons' favourite movie star. And how do we get him? Blackmail. Who's the guerre?
All right, Patrick. Orson Fortune. Is that indeed a sexy name or not?
I mean, when it's on Jason Statham, maybe it's sexy enough. In a nice looking suit.
And that was Ruse de guerre, from what I gather. I'll fully back over you in the bus now and pronounce it correctly after hearing someone else pronounce it for me.
Now, is it in Spain? Is it in France?
Means,
is it in Monte Carlo? I don't know.
Exactly. It sounds like it means blackmail. And Fortune, Operation Fortune, is the last name of Jason Statham's character, as you indicated. What do you think of this trailer?
I think it looks fine. As I'm very mixed on Guy Ritchie's filmography in general. I am excited that he has taken all his blockbuster cachet and is kind of stepping back to what he seems to be more comfortable with in recent years, with The Gentleman and this one. And I am a big fan of his Man from U.N.C.L.E. movie. So, and this kind of looks like it's operating on the same space. He's bringing back a lot of his little cadre of actors. Hugh Grant's back from The Gentleman and Man from U.N.C.L.E. So that's exciting. And Hugh Grant always looks like he's having fun in these movies. So, I mean, for a January release, I think it's falling into that gentleman slot, and STX is hoping to make that sweet, sweet gentleman money.
It's interesting you're making that comparison. That's actually one of the ones that I didn't really like as much. I think that his last film, Wrath of Man, was a lot more enjoyable and harrowing to watch, at least in the theater, with that great sound effect of violence that it had in that final shootout sequence, especially.
Yeah.
Eddie Marson's in it, as you mentioned, the Guy Ritchie, cast of everybody that you're familiar with. It's nice to see Aubrey Plaza play this type of a role. I think she's got the right wit and humor to really chime in and be a strong female character in a Guy Ritchie world.
But that little bit of accent that we heard from her, I don't know.
I didn't pay enough attention then. I didn't notice the accent.
Maybe they're trying to hide it. Maybe it sounds a little rough. From that one line. She only had one line. So
did it sound like she was trying to play Italian or Spanish, or what did it
tell.
sound like to you?
I don't know. It sounded like Aubrey Plaza doing an accent.
Okay. I mean, I guess I just always associate her with sarcasm, so it's hard for me to really pigeonhole what her intentions are when she makes a choice like that. But I think it looks fun, big, like you said. It fits that January slot where you can try to make some money off of having people come out to have a good time. The premise of Hartnett needing to go undercover as an actor to figure out whatever is happening and relay that to the team to pull off whatever the job is. It's a fun conceit. I think watching Josh Hartnett play the movie star he was supposed to be is, something that I'm up for no matter what.
Yeah, good meta casting in that sense. And generally, I will say that I like STX, who is distributing this movie, as a studio. I feel like they at least are making original movies out there that are not necessarily just, for kids.
Yeah, original IP adult films is heavily what they distribute. And normally they actually have, a film with over $1 million in budget, but underneath that, 50 million mark. So they're always in the middle. They are interesting. I can't say that I've seen one from them recently, but I can't remember if they did. I think they normally collaborate with Braun, and that's a pretty reliable collaboration.
Yeah. They're co-producing this with Miramax. So we're seeing
Miramax attempting the comeback.
Yeah, exactly. So you know what? It's an underdog story. Josh Hartnett, Miramax. I'm all for it.
It is an underdog story. Yeah. Any last thoughts on this, or should we push through to the Black Phone?
Let's see the Black Phone.
I'll be home in the morning.
Where are you going?
I'm staying over at Susie's tonight.
What's new? The flyer.
The papers call him the grabber.
I wish you wouldn't call him that.
You don't actually believe that story, do you? Because he can't hear you, and he doesn't really take kids that safe.
Oh, you goof. Well, isn't that just peachy keen?
You need some help?
You see that? Yeah. Would you hand me my hat? Yes, sir. I am a part-time magician.
Are those black balloons in there?
Would you like to see a magic trick?
I have an announcement to make. One of our students, Finney Blake, was abducted.
All right, Patrick, that was the trailer for The Black Phone. What do you think?
I think this is going to be an interesting movie on a meta level. Just because this is Scott Derrickson and his creative team coming off of some creative strife with Marvel Studios from Doctor Strange 2, and he's kind of going back to basics with what he's been known for in the past, going back with Blumhouse and making like a nice little horror movie. He's even reteaming with his star in Sinister, Ethan Hawke, to make this kind of like stripped down supernatural horror movie that it could be fun. It seems like a neat little movie that has style. I always love Ethan Hawke, and I'm always down to see a nice little thriller on a chilly February day.
It sounds like you're more interested in watching it for things happening in culture rather than the film itself, which does not speak highly of the film trailer that you just watched, in my opinion of what you're saying. I wasn't aware that he'd shot this after reaching the difficulties. I thought he'd shot this in between with the intention of still shooting Doctor Strange. Is that not correct?
I honestly do not know.
Okay. Interesting. Either way, yeah, there's a meta thought that I had watching this as well, which is like, oh Jesus, they're gonna make one okay movie like The Purge with Ethan Hawke, and Ethan Hawke is gonna elevate the material so far that you're gonna think that you actually have something, and then you're gonna create a universe, Blumhouse. And
Yes.
all the movies after that are going to be derivative and annoying, except for one of them, which is going to be accidentally good because you get a great independent filmmaker or something. And then it's, yeah. So that's the thought that I had when I was watching the trailer. It is interesting. Like I'm much more interested in watching this than It Chapter 1 and 2.
Yes.
Because this is an original attempt at creating IP. You get to watch Ethan Hawke go crazy, which he's so incredibly talented at doing.
Love.
He's in a limited series this year. I think it's on Prime Video called The Good Lord Bird. Maybe
That's on Showtime.
And it's actually hard to watch because he's so effectively crazy. And the way that he speaks and the religiosity that is beaming out of him is just so scathing and scraping, and in this 1800s patter of speech, but he's so incredibly convincing and talented in it. Yeah, I'm thrilled to watch him be a villain. He could very well be one of the most interesting villains next year. The played out psychokinesis, having telepathic images from dead children through a cut off phone. It's a little bit gimmicky, but, it's probably going to do good business for a horror film.
And I would say that as Ethan Hawke has gotten older, his face has just getting more and more interesting as the wrinkles develop on it. He was a pretty boy in the 90s with Reality Bites and wherever else he was in, but now he just looks so interesting as a person, as an actor. You just get so much from just seeing his face.
And his eyes are terribly expressive. Exactly.
Which is interesting because he seems to be in this mask throughout this movie where we can really only just see his eyes.
Yeah. It's until at one point it looks like it gets broken. Very, very interesting. I like the black balloons and the black van theme.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. But yeah, we'll see. It sounds like we both are more intrigued by the narratives around Blumhouse and these actors and directors than the film itself. But that still makes it a curiosity worth seeing. And as someone who's not a horror fan, that's as good as you're going to get from me. All right, on to the feature films that we're going to be discussing today. Let's go ahead and get started with Don't Look Up, the new film from Adam McKay.
I have a tattoo of a shooting star on my back.
Oh, that's terrific. This could be a complete disaster.
This is already a disaster.
You know that girl from Live TV said we're all gonna die?
No.
Yo, bro, what up? You'll never take me alive! There it is!
Giant comet whirling its way towards Earth.
Can you see it?
I can't! My head is in a bag!
I did have the FBI put that bag over your head. They don't do that. The CIA does, but I made them do it.
I had a feeling.
It's a good feeling, because that is what I did, and it was very funny and cool.
All right, Patrick, Don't Look Up, Adam McKay. What do you think?
Oh, geez. I don't know how you feel about Adam McKay, but this is one of
I think The Big Short is one of the most interesting
yes
film essays that's a movie, but is a film essay. And I think that this is a terrible misstep.
Yeah, and he's kind of going for it has a lot of his styles from the last 3 movies he's made. What is it? The Big Short, Vice, and Don't Look Up. He's kind of doing a similar aesthetic, except I just felt that this movie was both visually ugly and
yes,
it's one of the ugliest movies I've ever seen, and also just on an intellectual level, just an ugly movie.
Yeah,
a mean movie.
I came out of the theater and I had to give my reaction to the press representative, and the person before me was like trying to hold themselves back and like, middling bad, and I was like it's ugly and derogatory and like mean spirited without being nuanced. Like it's just like it's so negative in so many different ways that it's almost interesting that they thought this was a good direct, like that they kept going, like they never tried to change the tone in the middle. They just kept doubling down, and I really thought that like halfway through the movie he was going to figure out that like he was messing up and like change some stuff, especially with all the talent he has assembled. But let me try to go pull up the cinematographer. Do you know who it is off the top of your head?
Linus Sandgren, who I don't know. He did La La Land, which is a beautiful movie,
and he did First Man,
which both beautiful movies. No Time to Die as well. So.
Yes, it's not the reason it looks bad. I almost think is like an artistic choice to make it look bad, which I don't know what to do. Like I don't know if he thought that by doing that he was saying something deeper about what he was already saying. It's not very clear, and the ugliness is just so like fully patinaed in that you can't really layer it anywhere. And the thing about The Big Short is that all those performances were not only fun but memorable, and that Christian Bale was actually incredible.
Yeah.
The thing about Vice is Christian Bale is actually incredible. The thing about Don't Look Up is no one is that, and a lot of people are caricatures and are not really acting. They're showing up as themselves wearing wigs.
Everyone's pitched really poorly in terms of tone throughout this movie. And actually watching Leo DiCaprio play this bumbling scientist, astronomer person, I thought a lot about George Clooney in the Coen Brothers movies where he plays an idiot. And I felt like that's kind of where they're going for with Leo.
Interesting. Those almost never work for me, except for the one that's literally built around him being an idiot, which is Hail Caesar, which is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, and I think where the Coen Brothers is cynicism, because this is Don't Look Up itself is a very cynical movie. It's made by a person who is deeply angry. But I think what works about the Coen Brothers in their deep cynicism, which is something that they're criticized heavily for, is that at the end of the day, they also seem to truly love humanity.
Mm-hmm.
I think they love their characters, they love people, and they love the good-spiritedness beneath all this wrongheadedness, and there's none of that.
There's no earnestness here. There's no sincerity. No. There's just ugliness.
And every time there's a chance for it, like I thought maybe this little romance between Jennifer Lawrence and Timothée Chalamet that was popping up, or when Melanie Linsky shows up,
right?
When there is room for it.
And when Linsky's there, it is at its best.
Yes, I do agree with that. But he just undercuts it all with just more I won't say humor, that's not the right word for it. Just
attempting black comedy, attempting acerbic witticisms.
Yeah.
But kind of missing out tonally on keeping things cohesive. I mean, if you have two giant movie stars and neither of them play versions of themselves that are fun or particularly engaging characters, then you're already kind of playing with fire. That like you can get burned by having flat lead actors who are giant megastars, right? That's why David O. Russell, love him or hate him, knows exactly what to do with Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence. He gives them characters and makes them go. And that's why he never has a misstep with them. Even if you don't like the movie, you don't think the performance is the reason why it fails. And in Don't Look Up, there's no performance to really give. The most committed performances are probably the general lying to get money for no reason, and then Melanie Linsky and her level of betrayal and hurt and compassion and love and forgiveness throughout the arc of the thing. But otherwise, it's just Jonah Hill mocking. It's Meryl Streep mocking. It's, I guess I will say Tyler Perry is awesome. He's
think
just so fully believable to me in these bigger roles.
Yeah, I agree. Tyler Perry is a great character actor, and every time he pops up in something, I'm genuinely excited to see what he does.
He's one of the best parts of Gone Girl.
Yeah, he really is one of the best parts of Gone Girl. He's really good in Vice too.
Mm-hmm.
He was and sorry, I almost mixed up Vice with W, the Josh Brolin movie.
Easy to do.
So I almost like, wait a minute, was that Tyler Perry? Or was that Jeffrey Wright? But Rob Morgan, I also thought did he plays the I forgot what the Space Force was called. Once again, Anne McKay makes a joke about whatever actual space entity, that government entity that Rob Morgan was a part of, but he's a scientist who helps Leo and Jennifer Lawrence.
He's part of the like an astronomers society that's like observing to make sure that there's no impacts or solar flares that knock out humanity.
And I thought he also really grounded his character in this kind of...
He did it first, and then he got ridiculous as they're leaving the TV show, and they're having like these giant like Shakespearean play moments in like a street while people are throwing chairs through windows like outside that restaurant.
Yeah. But should we talk a little bit about what that, because we're talking around what
why don't you give me a synopsis of Don't Look Up, other than that we shouldn't look up at the screen when it's on
or click on it when it eventually comes out on Netflix. So Don't Look Up is about two low-level astronomers who discovered this giant comet that is making its way towards Earth that can potentially make the whole human race extinct. So they go on this journey to try to warn people about it, first by going to the government, where they interact with Meryl Streep, who plays the President of the United States, and eventually go on a press tour where they meet Cate Blanchett, who plays a news reporter, and Tyler Perry, and quickly find that people are not that interested in a global catastrophe event, as opposed to being more interested in making money and seeing how that goes along the way. And this whole thing plays out like a Blake Edwards style comedy where people are high into 100 and just people are just high into 100, and I don't know, how would you describe it, Taylor?
Yeah, I think that I'd echo a lot of that. There's a lot of
so much happens
simultaneously ironic and unironic, like annoying criticism of culture. And I'll make a comparison later about why this fails. But I do think that, I mean, at the start, why are the numbers going down is something Kate Dibiasky, Jennifer Lawrence's character, asks Leonardo DiCaprio's Dr. Randall Mindy when he's doing calculations, and her face gets all bug-eyed and enormous, and as they're realizing, and he dismisses the room, and it's just there's supposed to be a dramatic tension that doesn't exist. And from the start, it doesn't exist. They're attempting to create these stakes that never actually feel like stakes. And the stakes are that the world is going to end, and that no one believes these doctors who are from the middle of America, and no one will listen to them because they're scientists and everyone else is an idiot. That is the premise of the film.
Or not even just disbelieves. frankly, they also just don't care because they have bigger interests. Some of them do.
I would say that very few do.
Mhm.
Very, very few do. Because you're talking about like maybe 3 characters, maybe Cate Blanchett, but definitely President Orlean and Jason Orlean, which are Meryl Streep and Jonah Hill.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that don't care. I would argue that Mark Rylance's Peter Isherwell really cares. He's just focused on how to make money from it.
Yeah.
And, you know, otherwise there's no actual positions of power really depicted. There's no other decision makers. It's like the president makes every choice, which is kind of another reason why I don't like it. It's very much like fan fiction. Like there's one person to blame for every problem. And there's definitely not. Like there's different layers, you know, that go all the way up the chain of command that are just totally overlooked here. Which the argument is because of the president. There's just a lot of derivative and derogatory fan fiction type stylings here that are very unbelievable if you just examine like a day-to-day process of like what it's like to report to your superior that there is a foreign body that's going to attack the terrestrial continent of North America. Like there's so many different checks and balances in our military structure that would kick in that are totally separate from the president, that it's a hard premise to believe on that angle. But if we go with it, it's just like you said, it's ugly to look at. And I think what's particularly annoying to me is that as a lover of First Man, and I think it looks amazing, let's remove Sandgren, the cinematographer, from the picture. Okay, who's this film edited by? Hank Corwin, the editor of The New World, The Tree of Life, and Song to Song. If that cinematographer and this editor can't make this movie work, then it's a problem from the top down. And I really do think that it all starts on the page with David Serrata and Adam McKay creating the story of simultaneous nepotism and people being willfully ignorant and checks and balances not existing, which it just doesn't ring true. It's not an actual criticism film. It's like a shell of one. Does that make sense to you? Would you echo any of that or disagree?
No, I absolutely agree. And to think about Adam McKay's previous films, and I'm not even talking about Vice or The Big Short, but
you're talking about Talladega Nights. You're talking about Step Brothers.
Talladega Nights, Anchorman, like those critiques of whatever structures that they're critiquing. Talladega Nights, kind of like Middle America, Bush, Anchorman with media, which are all critiques that he's trying to do in Don't Look Up, right? Those critiques of feel much more powerful just because it's couched around an actually good comedy.
Well, it's not sentimental. It's sentimental and it's nuanced.
Exactly. It's completely nuanced, and that's also why I don't think Anchorman 2 works, because then it becomes outrightly just a hacky critique of cable news, 24-hour news, something that we've all seen before, that we can just watch Jon Stewart or whomever make fun of cable news. You don't need an Anchorman 2 to tell us that cable news is bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's that. I also have separate questions about that point in time, because I believe that's when he and Will Ferrell were starting to have a terrible relationship.
Yeah.
Was like right after the other guys, and I think that was right before Anchorman 2. Because they'd made Gary Sanchez Productions, and then there were all these issues, and now they don't even talk to each other. You know, the guys that made the most memorable 2000s comedies and like created comedy essentially for a generation now don't talk to each other. It's kind of a weird thing, but I do think that there's a lot of merit to that.
Are they the comedy Lennon and McCartney, where Adam McKay's kind of cynicism is kind of reined in by the
Will Ferrell's earnestness
Paul McCartney
and compassion, despite his own echoing of a lot of the concerns that McKay has. I think you are making a really smart point. Yeah, I think that is possible.
Someone has been watching Get Back, the Peter Jackson movie.
Yes, I need to catch up with it. It's got a few parts to it from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so there's all these big stars. How do all these big stars work for you in correlation? I guess there's Ron Perlman's reductive different generation racist who's sent to murder the asteroid. There's Ariana Grande's Riley Binna and Kid Cudi's DJ Cello for some of the bigger, more reductive characters.
It all just feels extremely hacky, for the lack of a better word. All these jokes, they just seem like easy targets and jokes that I don't see the purpose of anymore. Like, you can do better than do an airheaded pop star and what does a DJ actually do type of joke at this point. And I mean, granted, I love seeing Ron Perlman in movies, but even then, like, we've seen this character in Doctor Strangelove. I don't know what we're doing in 2021 making these same jokes. I just don't understand who the target is.
Yeah, that I would actually take almost everything you said and boil it down to one thing, which is like this whole thing's derivative. It's just derivative attempt at criticism, at politics, at the nature of humans. It's a very I think it's derogatory in that it's really talking down to the audience.
Yes.
And that's why I don't know what to do with how ugly it looks and how well the team is that's around it. Like I really don't know what to do, because I mean, comparatively, Vice isn't the most beautiful looking film, but it's shot, I believe, by and edited by the same team, and it just looks so much more interesting, and it's so much more invigorating. And a lot starts on the page, but basic framing doesn't start really on the page. You're still gonna block and shoot and light fairly competently, and or you should, and that doesn't really happen except for maybe the Midwest house scenes, if at all.
So with Vice and The Big Short, they're both based on true real life stories and real life events, and this one is completely fabricated fiction, which I think allows
you should
McKay,
look up.
which allows McKay to really go buck wild, and I think his fleet of fancies kind of got away from it. At least with Vice and The Big Short, that tethered him to reality. And even though Vice, he creates kind of this caricature of Dick Cheney, but he still had to stay somewhat down to earth, right? So, and also, just for this sake, much has been said about how much money Leo and Jennifer Lawrence has made from this movie. I think they can make a combined $55 million, and the reported budget on Don't Look Up is only $75 million. And I'm sure Meryl Streep and Cate Blanchett got paid as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that part of the issue here is that Netflix's business plan is how many people that already pay, click play, and watch for more than a minute, or 5 minutes, whatever their new measuring tool is. And I think that volume is actually pretty high. And I believe that very few people actually go through and rate things poorly.
Yeah.
And normally what they do is if they like something, they say they like it so that they get it more in their queue, but they don't actively dislike things. So I worry that they'll think that this is a success and keep going for it. And I worry that their platform, that's an apt business strategy. It's not a bad one for them.
And frankly, I don't think Netflix cares about whether or not their movies look good, because there's much has been talked about The Power of Dog, which I think is beautiful to look at on screen, but a lot of people have complained about the way it looks on television and through their Netflix app. So I wonder if the look of Don't Look Up may play better on Netflix on your television screen than does in movie theaters.
Well, I think it definitely depends on your television. I don't know about you, but I have a 4K screen and I have the 4K subscription.
Oh, humble brag.
Well, it's not really humble brag. It's very careful Black Friday shopping. and spending a month figuring out which one's going to have the best blacks and which one's got the least amount of LED panel outages, and lots of time spent doing that. But so a lot of the 4K streaming things do look fairly good on my television, and things like The Lost Daughter look gorgeous. I don't, I mean, we'll get there when we get there, but I do think The Hand of God is it has moments that look very, very good and are very interesting visual cues and ideas that it's boiling together. But in general, they let Bruised look kind of totally flat, Halle Berry's film. So there's a back and forth.
Was The Lost Daughter produced by Netflix, or is it just distributed?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I would imagine it's probably just distributed because it was Maggie's first film, and I don't believe that she had a pre-existing relationship. Unless she did The Kindergarten Teacher or whatever that was called.
But I guess I find the big blockbusters that Netflix has been producing, so your Red Notices, things like that, they generally look flat and
you're absolutely
flushed
right.
out.
Yeah, the best that their originals really ever look, and you're going to agree with this completely, and I expect complete seriousness from you, is Michael Bay's films. That is the best that Netflix can do.
Because Michael Bay knows how to spend his budget, and I don't know if Adam McKay has never been necessarily a great visual filmmaker, and I'm sure he himself would say that. But with this one, just I don't know. It just looked really ugly, and I don't know if it's the budget. I don't know if it's just how much free reign he got. I don't know what he did with this.
So, but before we move on to the next title, what do you think of the finale? This is coming out. Everybody should have had a chance to see it, and if you haven't, skip to the next time, because we'll talk about the end here. Everybody dies, and it's not particularly engaging or engrossing. There's no catharsis. There's really no emotionality experienced on my end. The asteroid seemed to be where about $5 million of the budget went, if I was gonna guess, just because
that flame effect at the end was $1 million itself.
So
Microsoft Paint.
What do you think of this?
I felt absolutely nothing. There was no catharsis to it. Once again, I thought maybe it'll go down to this existential crisis of like our life is about to end. Maybe it'll go into maybe a little bit of melancholia, or there's a new movie coming out about global extinction called Silent Night. That kind of deals a little bit about the kind of existential. It is out, yes. About the existential dread of knowing your life is about to end and what you do with that. And there's something interesting there, except they don't explore it. He just does a cheap flame joke, and then we see a bunch of rubble out in space, and then we have even more bad jokes about Meryl Streep's character having a tramp stamp.
Yes, and she forgets her own son. It's it's an ugly, bitter film that doesn't inspire me to like the personality of David Serrata or Adam McKay. I had I still have, but I'm a little bit further away from it than you, a very visceral negative reaction just to I don't mind telling a story like this, but telling it without any compassion for really any hero or humans that are taking things seriously, and not looking at the ones that would have been trying to do something, and just boiling it down to this hyper negativity of these superstars playing boring characters. It's just like, I don't know. I feel like if anything, it's more like the end of, cinema or something. Like it's expressing like this death knell of, this idea of telling people what to do with film.
What makes something like Dr. Strangelove work for its time and still work today as opposed to this? Because even
Kubrick's cleverness, talent, and a screenplay that at that point in time addressed a lot of people that have what we now call post-traumatic stress syndrome, but shell shock. That was a dark comedy for people that had night terrors and still do if they're alive.
Yeah.
And it is also about the blissful joy and ignorance of being stupid and going to war. But it's about war, and it's about going to it's about the war for a good reason, and it's making fun of it, which is cathartic for that group of people. This is not cathartic. This is not for that group of people. This is not for people that are shell-shocked and don't even know what PTSD is yet. This is not from one of the greatest living filmmakers. It's just so many deviations away.
Yeah, there's no joy in this movie at all.
No, there's no cowboy swinging on the missile as it goes down. There's none of that.
There's no Nazi scientist in his confined to his chair. Yeah.
There's no lines that you can't fight in here, gentlemen. This is the war room.
Mm-hmm. Did you find any jokes funny in Don't Look Up?
I found Jonah Hill silly at the very, very start. And I thought that the first time that we heard that the general charged for no reason was silly. And then everything got it's okay. So here's the metaphor that I would use to express this film. Adam McKay took a crane. Then he lifted a skyscraper to hit a tack. That's what's happening. You know, there's a lot of pressure and then it's just a mangled mess, and there's nothing to it. So I'm going to ask you the most difficult thing to ask in a film that you hate like this, that is so ugly. Do you have a favorite scene, Patrick?
So that's why I was asking if you actually laughed at anything, because the one thing I did laugh at, and I did laugh out loud, which is rare.
A full lull.
Yeah, a full lull. Not a ruffle, but a lull. Is there's this one joke where Jennifer Lawrence is just perplexed by why was it the general charged her for snacks while she was in a waiting room, and then maybe about half an hour later she just brings it back up, explaining why she thinks that general charged snacks at the waiting room, and I found that funny. It was just a strange callback that I was not expecting, and that's kind of the surprise. That's what this movie is missing: little surprises like that can make me chuckle.
How did you react to her talking about it like another half dozen times?
Well, then once again, it becomes a skyscraper hitting a nail.
Yeah.
First time was good.
Yeah, if I had to pick a favorite scene, it would, and I'm not kidding, be when the credits start.
Yeah.
I really did not like this movie, and I cannot wait to see if Adam McKay makes something that doesn't suck, and I'll let other people watch it first so that I don't have to watch something quite so ugly for over 2 hours. Again,
is he directing that Showtime? The show. When I say Showtime, I mean
I believe
Los Angeles Lakers.
He is successioning it, so I think he's directing the first episode, and then someone else will take over, which is what he did with Succession.
Yeah, which is probably why Succession is good.
So much better.
I haven't seen Succession, so I don't actually know.
There's a
I
pretty
personally find it good.
Big dip or increase over time from the further it gets away from him. It's quite interesting, but it was his premise and he directed it, so credit where credit is due. Anyways, let's get on to West Side Story.
I wake up to everything I know either getting sold or wrecked or being taken over by people that I don't like.
You keep away from him as long as you're in my house.
I'm a grown-up now, Bernardo. I'm gonna think for myself.
Tony, we need you if we're going to war. Who are you? Friend or foe?
All right, Patrick. Steven Spielberg is back in cinemas with a remake of the musical play. I think it was released in 1957 originally as a musical, and then the film was 1961. How'd you react to this story of rivalry between the Jets and the Sharks? What is it now? 60 years later. So,
I will say that going into this, I was very cynical about it. There's no reason why a West Side Story remake should be happening, especially because the Robert Wise movie is such a classic and one of the best filmed movie musicals ever made. But
I'm going to disagree with you there, but that's okay.
But I was completely taken aback by just how good I found Steven Spielberg's West Side Story to be, and I should have never doubted one of our greatest living filmmakers of all time. You may disagree, but
I agree there.
Okay, good. I thought we were going to fight for a second.
No, you're talking to a kid that grew up making Play-Doh, Indiana Jones hats and whips. Like, Spielberg is in this blood.
But I was just surprised by how much life he breathes into this source material. And I thought a lot of the adaptation choices from the original stage musical and movie musical, and the combination of two, because the stage and movie version are very different in a lot of ways. But kind of the combination he chooses to add to this new adaptation to be extremely smart and thoughtful. And we could get into more details on the adaptation choices that he makes. And I think Tony Kushner's script and book adds a lot to a source material that was lacking in a lot of ways.
I didn't realize he wrote a book on the film as well.
Sorry, when I say book, I'm using the stage term of book.
Playbook,
or like when musicals has lines of dialogue, that's usually the book.
Gotcha. Okay.
Sorry. That's my musical nerd coming out. I know Taylor is not as big of a musical person. He listens to me and another contributor talk about musicals, and then he completely glazes over. You're
talking to a man wearing a Tick Tick Boom sweater, sir. Check yourself. But yeah, so you appear to have adored it. What type of a rating would you place on this if you had to give an arbitrary rating out of 100 right now?
I would give it like an 80 to 85 pirouettes out of 100.
Okay. Yeah, I'm more of the 60, 65 range. I think the most interesting thing here is how thoroughly directed it is by Spielberg, and how informed it is in his lens choices of how he's ending a scene and then starting the next one off of those movements.
Yeah.
And that is so absent in a lot of these other AAA filmmakers. We were briefly talking about Guillermo del Toro earlier in his upcoming film Nightmare Alley, and I watched it like literally right after West Side Story. And it just really shows a difference in competence, because his scenes are these fade out blacks or these fade in blacks that are totally unintuitive with how the previous scene or momentum was built in the editing process. And this is just so thoroughly crafted. You know, it's, people always say that you can mute a Steven Spielberg movie and still understand the story because of how he uses the camera. And that's as on display as ever here. I think this is a great leap up from The Post, which in his filmmaking talents behind the camera, which is a fine movie, but this really is blocked and shot in such a way that I was very convinced of its merit. And you know, I just didn't particularly enjoy the music or the Romeo and Juliet shtick, but that doesn't mean that it's bad by any means.
Well, especially with musical scenes, there's such an apex of emotion highness that usually musicals, when a musical scene ends, there's a built-in pause for applause, but a movie can't do that. So the way he cuts away from a musical scene to some sort of action in the next scene, I just thought was very revelatory.
Yes, I don't have the familiarity with it. I watched it. I watched the original a few days before I watched the remake here, and I actually thought that a lot of the cinematography choices were poor in the original. I thought that the fuzzy sides of the camera to center on the main figures was very unappealing choice. It really, I mean, it either shows its age or it shows a constrained budget, one of the two. I think he was coming off The Sound of Music though, so I can't imagine the budget was very low. This just, I mean, the casting works from top to bottom better for me. The propulsiveness here is so much higher from the start. Like, it really just brings you in, leads you by your nose, and keeps you here in a way that the original hadn't. So I'm not as nuanced or familiar with the reasons why it's better or what choices he made, but the choices that I'm aware that were choices that he's exhibiting and just with the camera are very terrific. I just have some sensibility things where I didn't love it as much, but I definitely echo a lot of what you're saying.
Yeah, especially so. The original starts off with kind of this overhead shot of Manhattan, and it generally I feel like it has it shoots a lot of things from top down, while Spielberg here does a lot of bottom up, which I think is a very interesting choice for him to do. What it means, I haven't quite put my finger on yet, but I just think this isn't a simple shot-for-shot remake of the original 61 version. Spielberg's making a lot of capital C choices in this movie, and I think a lot of it works really well.
Let me chime in here. I think that first and foremost, in a musical with dancing, when you start at the feet of dancers, it's a lot more intriguing. And when you start at the feet where people live and you're telling a story about a neighborhood, that's a lot more intriguing than the top-down thing. That's just what I would think off the top of my head.
And speaking about neighborhood, a lot of this movie adds in subtext or maybe text about the gentrification of the Upper West Side. And as a person who went to school in the Upper West Side, that felt particularly resonant with me. I went to school near the Lincoln Center area, and learning a little bit about the history of how they just bought out families in order to tear down a bunch of apartment buildings and homes to build this cathedral to the arts, let's say, is very interesting to me. And that's kind of some of the smart things that I think it does to update this story, especially now that this is a movie that can look back at the time with hindsight, while the original was speaking about it during its time.
Yeah, that's interesting points. And I understand Spielberg's wanted to do this remake for a long time, and the gestation process shows there's a lot of just quality and thoughtfulness from the top to the bottom, from the neighborhoods and how saturated these tiny little side characters are, right? Like, you get some of the most intriguing, depending on who you are, up and coming actresses relegated to maybe a minute with Maddie Ziegler and Talia Ryder. Ziegler, who everybody knows from Sia's music videos probably, who's been acting more, and Talia Ryder, who's the cousin in Never Rarely Sometimes Always. You see them for a second.
Yeah.
You know,
and
it's very interesting.
A bunch of people making their movie debuts. Like Rachel Zegler, who plays Maria, and I believe David Alvarez hasn't been in the movie. He plays Bernardo, and he is also a revelation.
Yeah, so I'm forgetting is David Alvarez's character the one with the gun at the end?
No. He plays Bernardo, who is the brother of Maria. Yes. Okay. And of course, Mike Weiss has been in movies, but he's never had, and Mike Weiss plays Riff.
Yes.
He has been in movies before, but never in a role as juicy as this. And he really adds a lot to a character that I've never thought of before.
Yeah, I was taken by him. I actually have a different favorite. Josh Andres Rivera.
So good.
Was my favorite, and he plays Chino, who has the gun at the end. And I can't believe how much interiority that face has, and how many different emotions he can wear very easily. That's perhaps one of my favorite debut, or it might be my favorite debut performance from an actor this year. It's really something else.
Which, once again, this is what I'm saying about the smart deviations that Spielberg and Kushner does with this movie. Chino is a nothing character in both the musical and the movie. He's basically a plot device. But here they just add so much to his character, and Josh Andres Rivera himself, like you said, adds so much interiority. And even Riff is given a much more bigger sense of interiority, this sense of betrayal he has of Ansel Elgort's character Tony no longer being a jet.
Yeah.
That genuine hurt. And one of my favorite adaptation choices is the way they do the song Cool, which for me has always been a cheesy song, a dated song, and I believe in but here they make Cool into this breakup number between Tony and Riff, in which they're actually fighting over an object, but really it's a symbol of their friendship. And this choice of originally the song is just between Riff and the Sharks. It's Tony is not involved in it, and in the movie version, it's placed after spoilers. I mean, it's Romeo and Juliet, the death of Riff.
Mm-hmm.
It's placed after that to kind of dampen down any emotion. But here it's played as this song to explain this breakup of a friendship, and I just thought that was a really smart choice.
Yeah, I don't have the familiarity with these song choices and how they're being used differently, but I do think that not knowing the names of them, watching the original and then watching how they're pulled off in this one, I like this one a lot more. There's a lot more energy. There's a lot more driving emotionality in what's happening, where I'm invested in how the choreography is going, because it's indicating who these characters are exhibiting themselves as, in a way where the original was very much like, we're going to perform well, but we're not performing well with the intention of building character arcs at the same time. And it's thrilling.
There's also a brutality to the choreography, and in the Rumble scene especially, which is the kind of this fight scene between the Jets and the Shark, this confrontation. And I watched this movie with my wife, and we've seen West Side Story. We know how this all plays out. We also know Romeo and Juliet. We know how this ends. And she had her hand over her mouth, and I was kind of taken aback by this, just how effective Spielberg as a filmmaker can make this scene that we all know the results of into something as cathartic as it becomes.
That's as someone who doesn't know if the rule is to always pay it off the same, I was also invested. I don't know what the name of the number is, or if you already said it and it was cool, but the warehouse scene where Spielberg, the rundown warehouse in the middle with the gun, and they're fighting over the gun.
Oh, so you mean the shipyard?
Maybe it was a shipyard. Yeah,
cool. That's cool.
Okay. The way that Spielberg makes that single hole in the floor as important as every single other person is just totally, like, the gun is not as threatening as that hole in the floor.
I know.
It's a very thrilling sequence. And as I think that he deserves nomination for Best Director. Even though this isn't really in my top films of the year, it's definitely my top directed films of the year. It's just so thrillingly engaging from a filmic standpoint. It's just the themes and the narrative, they don't really resonate in a way that grips me. But I mean, Ansel Elgort, Rachel Zegler, what do you think?
Tony is inherently a boring role, and usually it's played by wet blankets. And Ansel gives it the appropriate amount of wet blanketness to it.
I put it as he was entirely and consistently, without fail, competent.
Exactly.
I never looked at him and said, you're doing this wrong or bad, or wanted him to do it different.
And that's what Tony is. What can you do? That's the inherent problem with that character. I thought Rachel Zegler, however, gave a lot of interiority to Maria, another character who's usually boring. And I think she adds a lot of emotions to her performances, and I think she plays how young Maria is. And I think that's actually another smart adaptation choice of this whole movie, is that they play to the fact that these are basically teenagers, even if they don't look like teenagers. Once again, the prelude to the cool scene, you have the sharks just playing guns, like playing almost cops and robbers, just shooting, play fighting with each other, which really just heightens the fact that these are kids who are making dumb choices.
Yeah, and I think that actually the thing that sells how young they are is the interactions with the police and how effective the performances of, it's Corey Stoll, I think, is the lieutenant, and then
Corey Stoll and Brian Darcy James, another musical favorite of mine.
I think that those two really just sell that there's this big adult world closing in on you, and the that cop sequence where the woman locks herself in
the Officer Krupke sequence.
That's that's definitely one of my favorite scenes of the year. It's just absolutely terrific. I also like the story they have with a woman who maybe is transgender. It's not really that clear to me.
Her name is Anybody's, and she's in all the adaptations of West Side Story, but it's never explicitly said what she is or stuff. But here I think they kind of play to the fact that maybe she is
at one point she says she's not a girl. So I don't know what she is, but I found that to be a very convincing character and a very emotional character that I don't really remember more than once. Like at the end of the original film, like her saying like something like, "I'm not them. I don't want to have to leave the restaurant," or whatever, for some sort of a conversation. But I didn't really remember that character, and I found the interiority and the compassion that Anybody's has to be very intriguing and layered Tony with another level that I was surprised by. I think that's maybe one of the more interesting relationships that exists in the film with Tony.
And can I just say, and I think this is a trait that all great filmmakers have, Spielberg just knows how to shoot faces. There's so many interesting faces that he gives the classic Spielberg close up to and the lens flare. And he just populates the gangs with interesting people and interesting characters that even though we don't necessarily learn their names, we just feel like we know who they are. There's this one person in the Sharks who I just kept calling the Little Richard character, because to me he just looked like Little Richard, and I love seeing him in every scene he was in.
I think Spielberg and a lot of directors that are great that do know how to shoot faces, though, do shoot faces more beautifully. And that's interesting. It's like, do you shoot beauty aesthetically, or do you shoot what a face actually looks like, which is something that happens in Licorice Pizza from Paul Thomas Anderson, where we're really looking at what a human face looks like a real normal person that has zits or crooked teeth or a dry spot on their scalp or something, in a way that I still think Spielberg is a master, but he's not as interested in what real humanity looks like, but this heightened version. And I think there's a difference there in sensibility that makes me love a PTA a little bit more than a Spielberg the older I get.
But can we talk about how beautiful this movie looks? Because I think
please tell me why the most beautiful thing in cinema this year is in fact a puddle.
The puddle. I don't know how he did it. Or I mean, I can imagine how he did, but it's just
the idea of one take, though. Like,
right.
I was running in my head as I watched that, and I was like, well, if you fucked this up, like, how long does it take for there to be no ripples in that puddle and to reset?
Right. But even just the whole, how would you describe the aesthetic of this movie? Because to me, it looks like an Edward Hopper painting of just this kind of like bold, fleshed out colors that it doesn't look like any other movie out there.
It's like
today.
Nighttime urban Havana bliss or something. Like there's simultaneously the fact that it's New York, but also like this idea of like Havana where everyone's not wealthy. The buildings don't look beautiful, but they're well lived in and they're warm. And there's a sense of culture thriving, and there's this beautiful shadow castness to it all.
Exactly. Yeah. There's just a sense of life and both blissfulness and melancholy. I think that's why I kept thinking of Edward Hopper, who I think is really good at capturing urbanites and that sense of melancholic blissfulness of the city. Because I'm from New York City. I love this sense of contrast of living in New York. And even though this doesn't look like the city that I know today, I think it really captures the feeling of being part of this world that is simultaneously oppressive and sad, but well lived in and full of hope.
Yeah, I guess when I think of Edward Hopper, it's just that those images are typically pretty clean. And there are those scenes with Anita, like in that area where it's not quite as clean looking, but there's definitely like a light. Like I think I would agree, like the lighting quotient of his paintings is a lot of what Spielberg's doing here. Do you have like a least favorite choice or something that you really thought was absurd or didn't like in the film?
So they placed I think they placed the I Feel Pretty sequence back to where it belonged in the stage musical, which is after the Rumble sequence. And that sequence usually kind of plays to some sort of dramatic irony of her feeling so blissful, not knowing what has already happened to her brother. In the movie version, they placed that more towards the beginning, and I think that works a little bit better for me, just because I think it makes that song feel very irrelevant. Dramatically, it kind of helps give the audience a sense of ease and this comic song to help line the tension a little bit. But I think for this film version, it just felt gratuitous or superficial.
I think I agree. I didn't know why I thought that was kind of off, but that makes a lot of sense.
For a stage musical, it makes sense because you kind of need that in the live setting, and that's also the beginning of Act 2 number. The Rumble leads to intermission, and then the first song back from intermission is I Feel Pretty. You need a big number to get the audience back in their seats. So that's why that works there. And the movie, I think, smartly brings that back to the front. Brings that to the front where it's describing the blissfulness.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I have something a lot less nuanced to whine about. And it is Spielberg shooting under the bleachers, the kiss and romance sequence between Tony and Maria with, I want to say, more than 100 lens flares in very, very low light, meaning they're in a gymnasium underneath bleachers and there's lens flare. It's one of the most absurd things that I think I've seen in a huge movie that is otherwise fairly grounded. Just to throw those J.J. Abrams-esque lens flares, and not be even out in the gymnasium was pretty annoying to me. And it felt like it was in a different movie at that one moment. I was like, this isn't, what are you doing? Well, this looks so beautiful. Why are there lens flares?
to do that for sake of argument, that's kind of that's young love, baby. You get those lens flares, your heart's pumping, you're feeling like, oh, this is the love of my life, love at first sight.
Lens flare is here though is ugly, and I don't know that I think the premise of young love is ugly. Would be my differentiation there.
Also, the original cha-cha sequence in the movie is just one of the best, in my opinion, one of the best sequences where they kind of go to this otherworldly place. I also, something else that I don't think necessarily works as well is giving the song of Somewhere to Rita Moreno's character. Obviously, if you're going to have Rita Moreno in this heightened role in the movie as the Doc character, you're going to have to give Rita Moreno a song. Usually that's sung by Maria and Tony, which is essentially them having sex. But I just don't think that necessarily works as well here, even though Rita Moreno does give it its gravitas because she's Rita Moreno, but I don't think it necessarily works as well as giving it to Maria and Tony.
What did you think of Rita Moreno?
I think, like I said, I think she gives that role the appropriate gravitas. They heighten Doc more in this movie, and as they kind of do with every supporting character, they kind of give them more weight, and I think she gives Valentina, which is the name of the character, that sense of weight. And yeah, I think it was perfectly fine, honestly.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting is I feel like the original West Side Story, you might have a different reaction, really feels long. And this is a longer film than that. And it didn't feel long as I was viewing it. It felt very intriguing all the way through. I wasn't sitting there on my hands going, when can I leave? I was fairly often intrigued by what was happening in frame. Even, the scenes where they're going very slow and just doing dialogue or a slow song, I was still interested in the choices that were being exhibited in a way that I wasn't in the original. Is there anything else you want to highlight, or should we go over favorite scenes?
Let's talk about our favorite scenes.
You give me yours first.
I think I've already talked about, I really love what they do with the cool sequence. Once again, that was a song that I've always thought.
Why don't you describe it a little bit further?
Sure. Cool is this kind of interesting jazzy composition from Leonard Bernstein that to me, with its use of slang, feels very dated and silly. And every version I've seen of it is very silly. But this is the first time that I thought it really propelled it to something that I can take a bite out of. And as I was saying before, this sequence comes when Riff, Mike Weiss's character, gets a gun, and Tony wants to stop the rumble from happening, and he sees this gun. So this song becomes Tony pleading to Riff to just stay cool, give me the gun, don't do this rumble. You're only going to get yourself killed or in trouble. And Mike Weiss's Riff feeling a sense of betrayal that his best friend would do this to him. And there's this sense of brotherly love between them, maybe even more than that. I who can say? But there's a sense of love between them that seems to be shattering. And this sequence makes this kind of a breakup of their friendship. And like you said, Taylor, there's this, they do the sequence in an abandoned shipyard where there are holes on the pier, and it literally gives the metaphor of it becoming a balancing act for both of them of what to do with their friendship, what to do with their pride. And I just thought it was a brilliant choreography and really adding weight to a song that I've never particularly cared for.
Yeah, that's a well-placed argument. Mine is definitely boring. So since mine is boring, I will just double up on two things we already talked about. I think that the fact that a puddle is the most beautiful image of 2021 is really something, and I can't get that slow pan of that puddle out of my head as the feet are walking through it. And then I will also shamelessly plug one more time that police station song.
Yeah, Officer Krupke.
Yes, where the woman locks herself in the cell to get away from the boys, and it's just an absolute hoot. That's one of the most pleasant scenes I think I've seen in cinema this year.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, just a choice of saying it in the police station where it's normally not set. I don't know. Spielberg, he's just showing why he's so good. It's kind of rude, honestly.
I think the Spielberg director might be pretty good.
Yeah. And Kushner's no slouch too. He really adds a lot to this movie.
No doubt. All right, let's get on to The Hand of God from Paolo Sorrentino.
Amore, non correre! Non ti preoccupare, va!
Ti sei fatto grande.
Guarda tua madre.
Eternamente voglio restare con te.
Vabbè.
All right, Patrick, this is a film that we diverge a little bit more interestingly on. I think that I'm in the mixed to positive camp, whereas you're in the negative camp on The Hand of God. Why don't you give me your initial reaction?
Honestly, I saw this about half a week ago, and a lot of it has already left my mind, which is a rude thing to say to Paulo Sorrentino's film. But this movie, I think generally I love these kind of memoir movies. I know Sorrentino has cited Fellini a lot, so this is kind of like a little Armored Core-esque. But I love movies like Cinema Paradiso or Barry Levinson's Baltimore trilogy, things of like filmmakers just exploring their childhood and exploring their families and meeting all these strange characters. And when it does talk, when Sorrentino does delve into this weird and wacky family that he has, I found that slightly amusing. But then he kind of dips into this more, I would say, existential type of. It's very Fellini. He's an Italian filmmaker. What can you say? Not to be reductive. I guess I'm struggling a little bit to exactly point to why I just felt very detached from this movie throughout. I was very aware that I was just sitting in a movie theater watching this movie on assignment.
Oh boy, that's not the most pleasant angle to take. Yeah, it drags. The film drags. I think the title of the film is The Hand of God, which is reference to the Diego Maradona goal that was scored when he was acquired by Naples, and he literally scored with his hand. A much better film about Diego Maradona is the film Maradona from Asif Kapadia, who made the absolutely fantastic Amy documentary on Amy Winehouse. So I didn't know that going in. I thought The Hand of God was going to be like a setting or something a little bit more specific. And it definitely gets into like this Italian magical realism that doesn't really work. But then there's this other thing, which is like the beginning of the film is gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. The camera is panning along these waves, and you begin to feel like you're being brought into a sumptuous oil painting. It's going to be meticulously brushstroked out with these great camera choices. You pass these offshore racing boats or perhaps smuggling boats, which, is a great foreshadowing touch that they spend no effort on. There's this helicopter hum, and you realize that this flying vehicle is overtaking these boats that are hauling, and you realize how long it's been since you've seen a helicopter shoot aerial cinematography instead of a damn drone. And that's just thrilling. And then it pulls up alongside this classic car that's slowly driving down the street, and then it pans back and it looks at a helicopter landing on an island that looks like what someone would call the Hand of God, which is what I thought it might be about until we were introduced to the real reason. And there was just such great promise and artistry at the beginning that I don't really know where it all went wrong. If like I said earlier, this is just an issue with Paolo not killing his darlings and thinking that everything matters more than it should, and thinking that it's much more clever to leave his sister in the bathroom for the entire film than it actually is, and then have her come out with zero payoff and no interest. Like, it's way too late for that to work. But then there's other things like the fake bear, and like showing us the fake bear as his parents are dying, which is weirdly funny. Like, did you see that? A lot of people didn't see it. I talked to some people after the film was over about it, and they didn't notice it because they were focused on the slumped figures. But when his parents die, there's the fireplace, and then there's the parents on the couch, and then there's a glass door, and there's a soft light, and someone standing in the bear costume is there, and it's like, oh boy, I liked that touch.
I think he does a lot with foreground and background, and throughout the movie, I think he does a little bit of playing. I think I remember in one of the opening scenes, where his sister goes to see what's the religious figure that she sees. I can't remember right now.
The little monk.
The little monk, but also what was the angel that she sees?
Oh, I didn't realize she saw an angel. You're talking about the figure that drove her?
Yeah. Isn't that an angel?
I don't remember his name. I didn't think that was an angel. I thought that was just like, I mean, now that you're saying that it's an angel, but I don't remember it being introduced as an angel.
But I think he does interesting things with foreground, background, and in that scene in particular, I noticed some things, but about the bear itself, I don't think that's not coming to mind, honestly.
Okay, that's unfortunate because it's a. I mean, do you remember when he was scared to death and he hurts himself with the bear when he comes back after he's been kicked out and they're moving the furniture? No. So he's been kicked out of the house for having an ongoing affair with his business associate.
Yes.
At a later point, she says that he'll be able to come back next week because she needs help to move the furniture in. And then the first scene that we see them together, he's helping these men bring this couch into a building. And they're making jokes about whatever's rustling in the brush being, or not jokes. They're saying that it's a bear and they're scared. And he's like, no, it's a cat. And he starts going meow, meow, and smooching for it to come. And then a bear stands up and he runs and flees and falls and hurts himself. That same bear is later standing outside the glass door center frame as they die. As we watch them die, that bear is standing there, which is, you know, it's this interesting balance of humor and death. Does that ring any bells or
no? Yes, I do remember that scene. Sorry, I thought you were still talking about the bear during the parent death scenes, because I don't necessarily remember that part. But what you're saying about this interesting contrast of this interesting contrast of kind of life and death within this movie. I think we're kind of seeing. Well, I think there's a lot he's doing with contrast in general, kind of this horror and Madonna figure with that sister, kind of this with his family, where there's kind of lots of love and also kind of lots of cruelty. There's that grandmother who only says profanity, but there's love there, and
the grandmother who's beaten.
Yeah. But I think he's dealing a lot with this contrast of this kind of loving family that's also terrible.
Yeah. There's this interesting line that the brother says to him at some point after their parents have died. He says, "You have to be the perseverant one because I can't be."
Yeah.
And I think that that's actually kind of one of the keys to unlock whatever the fuck is happening in this film, because he has these scenes with Antonio Capuano near the end, and you know, he's met a filmmaker, and this filmmaker offers to make films with him and tells him not to go to Rome, to stay here, and you know, how many stories there are here. But what's interesting is that Capuano wouldn't have made a film yet, because this is all happening during the Hand of God year, I believe. And that was like 1986, and I don't think that Capuano made a film until the latter half of the 90s. So there's something I don't really know what the timelines are in this film, for one, and why Capuano is this figure. Like, what do you know if he was a stage director or what was happening? Because I thought he was making a film, but he wouldn't have been making a film at that time. There's this weird thing where maybe he's juggling all this stuff that was important from his childhood together, without the timelines actually syncing up.
Yeah, I honestly don't know much about him, about him. No, yeah, I don't know.
Well, why don't you tell me what you disliked so much? Because I'm talking about it from a fairly positive perspective so far. I do find it intriguing, but there is, some rough cinematography in other sequences. There is some absurd, in a negative way, isms going on. What do you dislike? What did you not respond to?
I would say this. I'm not necessarily the biggest Paulo Sorrentino fan. I think what he does he's a filmmaker that I think when he's dealing with excess, which I think a lot of his movies does deal with, Il Divo, The Grand Beauty, things like that. I think he does that interestingly, but he's never been kind of this emotionally earnest filmmaker. At least I've never thought so. And so I was kind of surprised by the subject matter of this movie because I thought, oh, okay, interesting. We're going to delve into his childhood and he's going to take a look at his childhood from this perspective. But then I think there's kind of, when I'm talking about this dueling contrast, I think there's a genuine meanness to the entire movie. Especially with the way he treats.
There is from the family. I don't think that there is from our central character.
No.
Who's played by, I think, Filippo Scoti, and I'm forgetting the name of that character. Fabietto, who's later called Fabio, right?
Which is kind of his
stand-in.
Yeah, but I think there's a way that. And I think a lot of Italian filmmakers do this too, but there's kind of a grotesqueness that he kind of overlays to a lot of the people within his family that I think for whatever reason,
ugly decadence.
Yeah, ugly decadence, which is great when you're trying to make a comment on excessive figures like he does in his previous films, but in this one where it feels more grounded and like I think I was imagining that I was going to see this, kind of like Radio Days-esque movie where he's kind of like, oh, this is my childhood, isn't it grand? But also, they're so silly. The grotesqueness just kind of turned me off. Through it, and I was just never on its wavelength.
Yeah, there's. You mentioned Fellini, and I mean, I see how. I would say that it's like inspired by a lot of choices Fellini made, but it just doesn't play Fellini as like his obese aunt is, like you're saying, it's mean spirited.
Yeah, even her boyfriend who has the
Aldo
electric voice.
Yes, but in conjunction with it makes the dark comedy work for me in a way that Don't Look Up it doesn't work. Where the gorgeous aunt is, she unscrews and throws the battery out while she's sunbathing. Like that was just so funny and cruel at the same time that it's an interesting tone that I haven't really seen that much.
Especially I feel like Sorrentino himself doesn't usually delve in this type of humor. I don't know if you agree with that.
I'm not that familiar, so I actually don't like The Young Pope, which I think is what most people know him from. But I adored Youth, and that's it. That's all I've seen. I thought Youth was awesome, and I really thought I was going to get something that pleasurable and like fun, and I remember it being very meticulously shot. And that is not what I got here. That movie's like Paul Dano and Jane Fonda, Keitel, Kane, Vice. Like it was and it was looking back on life and lusting for youth in this way that I do think is present here, but it was a lot more charming, which says more about Michael Caine and Harvey Keitel than anything else.
Yeah, I think I generally just didn't find this particularly charming or engaging, and I think my brain just and this is I feel like you're seeing this from the way I'm talking about. My brain just kind of shut off from it at a certain point, which is never a good thing. And I apologize on my behalf and on the film's behalf for not giving it that chance or trying to really actively work to engage with it, because at a certain point I just kind of like shut off from it.
There's it's interesting when a film kind of creates that response. For me, there's these certain moments that I think are really lovely, and then like you're talking, there's a lot of ugliness or drabness that is very unengaging. You know, like I've never been more uninterested in someone hanging upside down, like ever in my life. Like it was so like garishly stupid. Like I had no idea why that was inserted there, other than to be like, look at, you're being raised around arts and culture or something. But the thing that like comes to mind is the beauty of the common man. You know, what sound does offshore boat make go when it's going 20 kilometers an hour or whatever they said, right? Boof, 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 boof. That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. And the way that he delivers that line the final time when his friend is, you know, going to sentencing in the following weeks, like that is so much more beautiful than so many other things that this film does. And it's so small, just this audio thing. And there's moments like that that make me really glad I watched it. And they're really impactful scenes and great moments. And I found like the mean-spirited phone call that was made by the mother to the neighbor that she doesn't like, where she gives her the part in the Fellini film. Like that was hilarious to me. And the way that the husband forces her to go tell her, and they all have to sit down at the table, like that was just joyous and silly. But then there's all this other stuff, you know, and it very much is a depiction of life or whatever for him, but it doesn't really come together in any way other than him just getting on a train going to Rome as soon as Capuano tells him that's not what he should do. And clearly it worked out for him.
Yeah. And so this year we also saw Belfast, which is another kind of film
which you did not respond well to.
I did not respond to. And the thing is, I love these memoir movies. I feel like you
don't.
Well, maybe I love the 80s ones because I really do love a movie like Avalon from Barry Levinson.
Okay, I don't think I've seen that.
Radio Days is a personal. Radio Days was like my first Woody Allen movie, and so I have this soft spot.
That's
for
a great one.
And also, I love Cinema Paradiso. So if we're going to Italian front, but yeah, I don't know why I've been bristling at these memoir movies recently, or these movies about these filmmakers' childhood. Yeah, I did not respond well to.
Let me sell you on a better, you know, memoriam type of a film. How about All That Jazz, huh?
Oh goodness, I love All That Jazz. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. But I wouldn't call that necessarily. I wouldn't call that in a similar vein to this one because he doesn't really delve into his childhood the way
but
Belfast does.
It's still semi-autobiographical. I see what you mean. You mean a childhood.
The one where they like, oh, look at my wacky family, look at how nostalgic.
Yeah, Radio Days does pull that off really, really well. I haven't thought about that too. It's just I love all of those movies from Allen, so
maybe because
that's an interesting comparison.
Maybe because Radio Days plays off like a sketch movie as well,
and it plays, which is in his wheelhouse, but it also plays off radio premise, which is also heavily in his wheelhouse from all the short story writing that he did. So there's an interesting reasoning there. I will say that the faces, you made a comment about the faces in Spielberg. I do think that the faces here really express this idea of Naples and what a Naples family looks like, and kind of this weird regality that everybody has, even though they're all living in the same apartment building. You know, there's a baroness who stomps on the floor and gets the ceiling hit with a broom to interact with people, but everybody pretends she's a baroness. There's I don't know, I definitely will have this stick with me more. I didn't respond to it particularly engagingly. I really thought it was going to be like, you know, Youth, where I was just bowled over and fell in love, and that's not what happened here, and the dangers of, you know, expectations.
I would say Tony Cervello, who plays Fabio's not brother, father,
yes,
who is a Paulo Sorrentino favorite, is always great, and he has one of the best faces for cinema right now too.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen the other films that he's been in because I'm so unfamiliar with Sorrentino. But yeah, he had a great face, and he had the great in between of comedy and seriousness. He was a perfect dad character. And the interplay and the romance of the whistling between him and the wife played by Teresa Sapanangelo. So it's Saverio and Maria who are the parents, and that interplay of, these cooing romance noises, and the fact that he's had an affair going on for at least a decade, I think, is just it paints a very interesting picture that for me will stick with me, unlike you.
No, I genuinely find the Tony Cervello scenes and should I pronounce this name? Teresa Saponagello.
That's better than my attempt.
I generally find those scenes affecting, and maybe it's also because of my prior connections with Tony Cervello, because, like I said, he was in the Great Beauty and Il Divo. He played Berscoloni in Laurel, and he's great in all those movies.
Those are all blind spots that I need to get to. Another just face that I loved was Renato Carpentieri, who played Uncle Alfredo, the lawyer who'd lost 14 cases in a row, and said things like, the only reason you didn't die is because of Diego Maradona. When his parents die, and he's like, why weren't you there? Why weren't you skiing? And he says, because I was watching the game because we have the tickets. And he's like, Diego Maradona saved your life. It's all Maradona. Like, his whole life is soccer. And it's so interesting to see, I guess, a European version of that crazy uncle who thinks that football is the reason that life exists. In Europe, it's just, he brought that to life for me. And then Patrizia is, who's played by Luisa Ranier, is absolutely flabbergastingly beautiful. And the camera and Paolo clearly loved her. And the depiction of her going crazy, but still being clever and funny is really, really interesting. And it feels like a really intimate representation of something that you would go through really privately as a family. And it's all those little notes that make me like it, but for some reason when I'm watching it, I'm like, really, this is all there is, and it's this long?
I don't know. I think that's why I'm having such a hard time with this movie, is like all the little pieces feel like they work for me. I just don't know what it is about the entire film that just became nothing in my brain.
I think it's the lack of animus. Like, there's nothing, there's no actual trajectory for the character Fabietto. Like, he's not really doing anything. He just has his cassette player and his headphones around his neck all the time. He never actually listens to something with us, so we never get in his headspace. So we're just seeing things happen to him that he's in, like the world he's in, but we never feel like we know him.
Yeah, even him falling in love with movies and art, and he had that whole scene where he's like, I've only seen 3 or 4 movies, and we see him watch something. Even then, I just didn't really feel that type of trajectory for him either.
Yeah, there's a tonal mismatch of what we're told and what expectations are. And there's no meet in the middle where he actually loves cinema. I mean, I do love the Once Upon a Time in America motif of just always watching that over and over, because why would you watch something else when you have a movie of such immensity and quality? But there's an issue with just make a bigger film. And it also begs the question, like, when are you gonna get De Niro, dude? Like, you love him this much, go get him. So it sounds like there's not too much more on this one. Do you want to give me a favorite scene?
I do think the most interesting scene is how would I describe it? Fabio's loss of his virginity. That
is an interesting scene where he has to brush her slit.
Yes, and that scene was just so absurd in a way that I can't help but find it interesting and compelling.
Yeah, it's
I almost don't want to talk about it just because I just want.
That's why I didn't talk about it, is because it's icky, but it's
like you're watching a car crash, so you have to look.
Yeah, it is a car crash, but we do have to look. That's exactly what's happening. And she's, you know, the line at the end of it of my job is done, now you look to the future. I really like that question. I think that's a great question to pose of, you know, when you're this young, how do you get someone to recover from grief? And you distract them, and then you make them excited for something like sex with someone who's younger, you know, especially in a more sex positive society than America.
And even the capper in the scene afterwards where the brother's like, oh, you just had sex, didn't you?
Yeah,
it was just like that dramatic irony of like knowing how it happened was also
and he's fully blushing in that scene.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very funny. And yeah, there's these little echoes. That's a great choice. So my favorite scene is going to be two scenes again. I'm going to cheat. It's the first scene, which I already described. But then it's also a scene near the very end of the film where he's boarded the ferry and it's nighttime. And the ferry is taking off, and there's all these nameless people, unclear faces, who are hooting and hollering and living the summertime that his brother had just told him about. And they're all leaping off of the dock where the ferry connects. And it shows this disconnect between people that can just live in the moment and him trying to pursue that thing his brother told him about, perseverance. And not staying in this delusional world for the Isle of Lost Boys and going back to face death. I just think it really sells the film.
Yeah. Speaking of lovely soccer moments or football moments, we off mic we were talking about what do we see when we look in the sky. There's lots of great love of football and soccer moments in that film that I was thinking a lot about during this one.
Good to know. Any final notes, or are we good?
No, I think it's interesting that two of the films that we talked about today are Netflix releases, and Netflix is really like just releasing these interesting movies. I know we have The Lost Daughter coming up. I don't know how interesting that Sandra Bullock movie is yet. I haven't watched
it.
It
just came out for us today, I think, or maybe it was yesterday. Unbelievable, which is not being responded to well by critics, from what I understand.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that the movies that they are releasing, and I don't know, was this produced by Netflix or is this just?
I believe this one was produced by Netflix. What's interesting is that they did produce Parallel Mothers as well. But that will come out next year, I believe. Even though it's had a theatrical run, it'll come out next year on Netflix. So in my opinion, I really liked Parallel Mothers. So I do think that between the Lost Daughter and this one, they've Parallel Mothers, they've got at least two good movies.
Yeah, and whether or not like Paulo Sorrentino or not, he's someone that I think should be making movies.
I can agree with that. On that note, let's get out of here. Thank you so much for joining me today, Patrick. Why don't you tell everybody where they can follow you and find you and all that good stuff?
Geez, I need to remember my handles. I've never had to talk about my handles before. You can follow me on Letterboxd at HAOSTER15. That's Hoster15. You can also follow my writing on drinkingandmovies.com. I have some exciting movies coming up. I'm going to be I've convinced Taylor to let me write about children's movies, so I'm excited to write about. I'm excited to write about Sing 2 and Rumble soon. So we'll see how that goes for me.
And how about Twitter?
And on Twitter, I'm at weird_Pat or Patrick124.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Patrick. Till next time.
Run! Go! Get to the chopper!
We have to go.
I'm coming with you.
That was brilliant.